I wish that the coolest people on the internet would find this video. That was a lot less cool than I thought it would be.
I wish Nikki Freeman loved me more than anyone in the fucking world.
And yes, that was a used chapstick. What is up, YouTube? My name is Trinity, and welcome to my video, or welcome back if you've been here before. Today, we are going to be talking about a new horror movie that the internet has been going crazy over for all of the right reasons. Today, we are talking about Obsession. Now, before we begin, spoiler alert, this is gonna be best for people that have already seen the movie. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It is so good. But it's also not going to be a whole analysis or anything. It's just kind of a collection of my thoughts that I've been working on since seeing the movie itself. But first, before we get into all of that, I want to give all of the well-deserved praise to Curry Baker, the director of Obsession, as well as all of the other YouTubers turned directors that have been releasing horror movies in recent years. Kane Parsons also just released The Backrooms, Markiplier, who wrote and directed Iron Lung, as well as Danny and Michael Filippo, who directed both Talk to Me and Bring Her Back. I find it so cool that independent creators are really bringing their visions to the spotlight without being constrained by what Hollywood wants and just showing the world their authentic artistic vision. Now, the title of this video is going to talk about male versus female horror, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who have analyzed the subject before, but these are just my personal thoughts based on Obsession itself and some other horror movies that I considered while trying to form my thoughts on it. The title itself is going to be male versus female horror, but I should say male versus female coded horror because I don't think that the themes and ideas that I'm going to outline for either of these categories is exclusive to men or women or anyone that falls into Kane. More, I think that depending on your own experiences and how the world perceives you, one might speak more to you than the other. I'm also not saying that female characters can't experience male horror or women can't be scared by male horror and vice versa. While watching Obsession, the two main thoughts I had in my head is male horror is fear of consequences, while female horror is fear of loss of choice and autonomy. Now, that isn't to say that female characters can't make bad decisions that lead to bad things happening, or that all decisions that male characters make are wrong or malicious or anything like that. Some of them are very pure good choices that are meant for the best, but then they lead to bad outcomes one way or the other. Sometimes the choices that are made are completely innocuous, something that you wouldn't even expect to work, such as making a wish on a novelty toy. When Bear does this, he is not a villain. Now, he is a very flawed character from beginning to end. However, this would be the equivalent of somebody making a wish on a dandelion. He doesn't know that the One Wish Willow actually works. Another facet of male-coded horror that I was kind of thinking of is that the consequences rarely are isolated to the person that made the choice, whether it be good or bad, which I think definitely makes sense because stereotypically men are supposed to be the protectors and everything. Not that I think that's the positive or negative stereotype, it just depends on what the person's interpretation of it is. However, because that's a stereotype, of course, something that would be ingrained in male horror is you not being able to be the protector. You see in a lot of like haunted house horror movies, it's the dad making the choice to move to a neighborhood or something, but then it's his family that are the ones initially suffering from whatever is in the house. In Obsession, Bear's choices or choices not to act hurt Nikki, Sarah, Ian, and his cat. Now, I know Ian's a little bitch and there's all that discourse going on. He was a bad friend, and it's also his choices that lead to Sarah and Nikki not getting a happy ending. But I don't want that to take away from Bear's actions once the curse is in place. Even when Bear realizes well into the movie that Nikki is not actually Nikki, she is this curse, maybe a demon, some sort of entity, but she is not in control. She is kind of under the surface, but she's not there. He doesn't take accountability for his choices at all. he keeps blaming her, begging her to be normal, to be the regular Nikki, to act like the normal Nikki, even when he knows that's not her. Now, it's possible towards the end I could have misread or misinterpreted some of the ending scenes. Some people say, like, oh, he was definitely feeling remorse toward the end. He finally understood what he did. I totally disagree because even in his action to take himself out of the equation, one, he pussies out of it very quickly. But two, I also read it not as, oh my god, I did this to my friend who I'm supposed to love. I've put her through all of this torture for my selfish ends. Nikki has already committed murder at this point. Him taking himself out and releasing her from the curse, her life is still over. So there is nothing he is really saving her from at that point because she's screwed one way or the other. But in his perspective, he can at least get away from all of the messiness. And on the flip side, female coded horror is the loss of autonomy or loss of choices, which is Nikki to a T. Honestly, we don't really get to know much about Nikki besides what Bear tells us in the beginning, what we can kind of see from her actions, because most of the movie, she's trapped in her own body. Again, when I say female coded horror, I'm not saying that female characters are infallible, they don't make bad choices, they don't make mistakes, they can't hurt other people. I'm not saying any of that. But the theme that I'm specifically talking about is a character's choices getting taken from them. Now, if this happened, the movie would have been a lot less impactful, but if someone were to experience what Nikki did in real life, somebody wishing for them to love them, I feel like it would be less horrible. Still horrible, but less horrible if their mind, their soul, whatever you want to call it, was completely taken out of their body and it was just a demon in there. Because, yes, your body is still getting used by someone that's not you and someone that doesn't care that it's not you, but you don't have to see everything that you're being forced to do. But instead, it's implied that Nikki's always kind of there under the surface. She's always there watching and unable to do anything about it. It really reminds me of Sunken Place from Get Out. Nikki's there watching as one of her closest friends, who is supposed to love her, as he claims, knows something is wrong with her, still chooses to do all sorts of stuff without her consent. Even if he doesn't know what exactly is wrong, he still knows it's not right. She has to watch herself ruin her reputation, ruin friendships and relationships, watch herself murder her closest friends. She has to watch her body degrade from neglect because he wished away any love that she could have for herself because it all has to go to him. Her dignity, her drive, her self respect, all of that is gone. There's not enough room for it anymore. There's a scene where Bear and not Nikki have a fight, and she kind of implies that she is going to off herself if he leaves to go spend the night at a friend's house to get some space from her. But the way I read it and the way other people have read it is that that's literally how she feels when he's not around because he literally placed himself at the center of her life. She has nothing else. She has no other passions, no other interests. She literally exists only for him. So when he's not around, it's like she doesn't exist. It's like she's fading away. And I'm not going to get too graphic, but there is a specific scene where Bear clearly essays Nikki. It doesn't matter that he didn't mean to hurt her. It doesn't matter that he convinced himself that she wanted it. None of it matters because the result is the same for her. In the best interpretation, that he thought that she was under the influence of something or that she was just mentally unwell, which he does say in the beginning of the movie that once he makes a wish, he thinks she's like on substances. That is the best case scenario. That is assault because she cannot say yes. But even in the worst case scenario, where Bear was truly a villain in all of this, which I don't think was the intent of the movie for this scene specifically. But even in the worst case scenario, let's say he knew that his wish took away all of her economy and he purposely did it so he could be with her like that. The result for Nikki, either way, is still the same. The best interpretation and the worst. And I shouldn't have to tell a lot of people this, but The people that get offended are probably the ones who need to hear it the most. Your actions matter a lot more than your intentions. Another scene that kind of pissed me off in the movie that's kind of in the same vein as this conversation is when Nikki, who is cursed at the time, but Bear doesn't know his wish went into effect, comes to his door a day after the wish is made, after having a night of her kind of acting weird, like she's suddenly all over him, she wants to make out with him, like in his bed and stuff. But then she has a moment where, like, it snaps back to real Nikki. She screams and she's confused because her last conscious memory is her being outside of her own house talking to Bear. And then she suddenly comes to shirtless in his bed. But Curse Nikki at the time covers it by saying, like, yeah, I was just being weird. I don't want you or I don't want other people to think that you took advantage of. And instead of clarifying with his friend, love interest, who, again, he thinks is on something at minimum, instead of clarifying with her, like, did I overstep? Did I do something? Like, were you comfortable? He just immediately jumps to defending himself. I didn't take advantage of you. I didn't do this, even though she literally said, yeah, that's not what I'm saying you did. Even though that is what he did, because the real Nikki couldn't say yes. I don't know, just the jumping to that immediately when you think something is already wrong with your friend, it made my skin crawl. And a flip side to the male horror that I talked about earlier, where loved ones are the ones also experiencing consequences of the male lead's actions, not always male lead, but often, is experiencing consequences of actions you did not take. As I was saying earlier, once Bear successfully offs himself, Nikki is about to do the same out of grief of losing her love, and then real Nikki comes back. And she wakes up to herself covered in blood, Bear dead. She pushes him onto the floor, which honestly, as you should, and her two best friends, who she murdered herself, also dead around her, and the sound of police sirens approaching in the distance. Bear took her choice to say yes, her bodily autonomy, her independence, her personality, her drive, her emotions, anything else you can think of. And now, even when he's dead, he took away her future. She'll never get to finish the book that she was writing. She will never get to feel the love that she was looking for. And I've heard a lot of debate online as to, in the beginning, if real Nikki was interested in Bear to begin with, or at least if he had a chance to begin with. And I've heard a rumor, I'm not sure if it's true, that scenes with Nikki were shot, one where she was interested, one where she actually wasn't, and then spliced together. And that's why it seems so ambiguous, which it was the purpose. And I think the most tragic, not really the most tragic, but the most ironic version of this movie is where Nikki was interested in Bear, or at least was open to like seeing where things went with him. And he did all of that for no fucking reason because he was a coward. And also, Nikki is not the only victim here. Yes, Ian gets shot, but again, he partially responsible for everything that happened. Not all the fucked up shit there does. I don't want to take away from that, but he is also a shitty person. Sarah, on the other hand, I had mixed feelings about her not being as concerned for Nikki in the beginning, but you could also just say she was closer to Bear than Nikki and Ian. But there's a point in the movie where Sarah wants to meet up with Bear in the middle of the night. She wants to tell them that before Nikki was cursed and everything, her and Ian had been hooking up for years, and she thinks Nikki was using him to get back at Ian. And she also wanted to share a special moment with him, opening a letter from her dream college to see if she was accepted or not. Bear at this point knew Nikki was not getting better. He knew that she was possessed at this point, which was confirmed as he snuck out of the house to meet with Sarah because the real Nikki broke through and begged him to kill her because she was so tortured in this state. And he had the nerve to say, "What's so bad about being with me?" I was rooting for this man's downfall when that came out of his mouth. Nikki was already showing very violent, controlling behavior. She had already shown specific aggression towards Sarah earlier in the movie when they were playing some party game and Bear was dared to kiss Sarah because she was sitting next to him. And Nikki specifically targeted her, pulled her out of the way, and got all jealous. So he knew Nikki was not only getting more aggressive, but had shown aggressive tendencies towards Sarah. And his bravest action during the movie was the most selfish one that gets her fucking pilled. It would have been easier for him to just stay home, but the bravest action he takes is to go see Sarah, and of course, Nikki goes crazy and kills her. And the most fucked up part of that is that she had gotten into her dream school. So that's two women's futures that he took because he was such a coward, but he was also selfish enough to be brave when it served him the most. Okay, rants specifically about Obsession over. I think some of the best movies that do have commentary on gender and gender dynamics and stuff are perfect at kind of blurring this line. One of the best that I could think of when it comes to female coded horror that's directed more towards a male audience is Alien. Now, there are elements of what I called male coded horror because they're making decisions that disregard a lot of signs that something isn't quite right. They don't listen to Ridley, and then they bring a person that's been attacked by a base hugger on board, and then, they're trapped on a ship with now a ticking biological time bomb. However, one of the most visceral examples of female coded horror is directed towards mostly the men in the movie. I know women can be targeted by face huggers and stuff and by the xenomorphs when they're fully grown, but it's mainly men, at least in the first movie. For those of you that don't know, the xenomorphs in different phases of their development are based off of human anatomy, human genitalia. Now, the facehugger's design is based off of female anatomy. I'm not going to go any more into detail about that. There's a bunch of videos that you can look it up. And they're the ones that forcefully implant the xenomorph embryo into the victim. If they are removed before the implantation is completed, then the victim dies. Then, after a brief incubation period, there is a very violent birth of the chest burster, which is obviously analogous to childbirth, with how bloody and excruciating it is, and how childbirth in a lot of instances can be deadly. And then a lot of people already know this, but the fully grown xenomorph, it is obviously based off of male anatomy. And the xenomorph's main drive is reproduction by force. Having the creature that is based off of female anatomy attacking men and forcefully turning them into incubators that will eventually kill them is the most literal subversion of female coded horror that you can think of. The tension and the atmosphere and the risk of a fucking face hugger and the chest burster like ripping you apart from the inside, all of that can scare anyone. However, the subversion puts men into the position of victim rather than observer in this situation of reproductive violence. Mind you, none of this is to say that men cannot be victims of SA, but specifically reproduction in this manner is not really something that gets shown on screen. Dan O'Bannon, who was the screenwriter for the original Alien movie, said, quote, "I'm not going to go after women in the audience. I'm going to attack the men. I'm going to put every image I can think of to make men in the audience cross their legs." He wanted to force the men in the audience into a very female coded perspective, and it worked. And also, my favorite horror movie, The Descent, can be argued to be a very male coded horror movie, even though the entire cast is women. Because someone's choices take away the choices of everyone else there. Other people have to deal with the consequences of those choices, and it eventually gets everyone killed. Juno specifically is the character that I think is the center of that analysis because it's her decision to stick with the main character, Sarah's husband, that leads to the car accident that kills her husband and daughter, and then to kind of bond and help Sarah through this trauma. They go to the Appalachian Mountains where they're going to go cave exploring. Juno decides, without anybody else's input, to take them to an uncharted cave where nobody knows they're going to be, which is where they find the crawlers that hunt them all down. Now, by the end, Juno does die and get devoured by the crawlers. However, It is Sarah, the main character, who has to live on now on top of the trauma of her child and her husband dying, the trauma of one of her best friends betraying her to have an affair with her husband, also has to witness the deaths of all of her other friends, the violence of all of these creatures hunting and devouring all of them. She has to live with the trauma of being the last person alive and having witnessed all of that. And if you think the second movie is canon, she's blamed for the deaths of all of her friends. And she is forced to go back down into the cave with those crawlers to find them, even though she can't remember exactly what happened because of all of the trauma she sustained. But I know this wasn't my typical video, but these are just some of the inner ramblings I had in the weeks since I've seen Obsession, and that's how you know a piece of media, a piece of art is good, because it sticks with you long after you've seen it. It creates dialogue, it makes you think. But I want to know what you guys think down below. Do you agree with my assessment of male versus female horror? Do you have anything to add to either side? If you disagree, respectfully tell me why or why not you don't agree. Do you know of any other horror movies that you think would fall into either side? They don't even have to be horror movies. I was going to bring up Passengers with Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt because everybody knows from her point of view it's a horror movie, and that's a very clear example of female horror, even though it's not depicted that way. Are there any other movies that you know of that fall into these categories? If you disagree, that's totally fine. You can definitely have a discussion about it in the comments below. However, because of the very serious and sensitive topics we discuss, and because I know how the internet is, keep it respectful. Don't be a fucking day. But thank you guys all so much for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed. And if you're already subscribed, click that notification bell so you'll be notified anytime I upload. I have a lot more ideas that I'm working on, but I'm trying to be a little calmer with myself so I don't get in my head so much about having to record. If I build it up too much in my head, I procrastinate because I don't think it's going to turn out well, and then I just put it off and it doesn't get done in how. Now, I don't have a comment of the day for today just because the one I was going to pick is really good and I'm waiting on that person to get back to me on if I can use that for my subscriber scary stories video because it is really good. It gave me the chills. If you know who you are, get back to me, please, because I would love to feature it in that video whenever I get to make it. And of course, if you have your own scary stories to tell, be sure to go to Spooky Chip Stories, email me your story, and as soon as I have, I guess I want at least 3 stories to tell per video. As soon as I get one more, I'll be able to do the first one, and we'll try to make a series out of it if enough people have scary stories they want to tell me. But thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate and love you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.